Blaine Prescott's fingers locked around Lena Ortiz's throat and lifted just enough to take her balance, her heels scraping the ribbed steel floor of the refrigerated trailer in short, panicked knocks that sounded too small against the compressor's roar. His thumb drove into the soft space under her jaw. Her airway narrowed to a burning pinhole. When she tried to pull in air, her chest answered with wet, oxygen-starved rattles that made one of the men behind him laugh and keep filming. The trailer smelled like bleach, Freon, and old meat hidden under medical sanitizer. White crates were strapped in 2 columns on either side, each stamped with Prescott Memorial inventory codes that looked official unless you knew how hospital manifests were actually printed. Lena knew. She worked respiratory nights. She checked lot numbers the way some people checked weather. The font was wrong on half of them, and 2 crate seals were broken and retaped crooked. And she had noticed both details 11 minutes before Blaine grabbed her by the throat and asked who she had called. Her split lip leaked down her chin and striped one of the crates in thin red lines that looked almost black under the trailer's blue emergency bulb. "Say it," Blaine said. His voice stayed calm, lazy, practiced. He was 26 and had never been made to finish a sentence he started. His leather jacket still smelled like cologne and cold air from outside. His $420 sunglasses were hooked at his collar, though it was still night, because he liked to carry proof that rules were for other people. Designer sneakers, white and clean despite the mud around the checkpoint lanes, planted wide as he held her up and watched her face change color. Lena clawed at his wrist, then changed tactics, and drove 2 fingers toward the pressure point at his radial nerve. Old training. Army medic cross-training with combatives. Tiny opening, precise strike. She hit it. He grunted, not pain so much as offense, and slammed her backward into a crate wall with a sound that boomed through the aluminum shell. Plastic ties snapped. A stack shifted. Cold vapor rolled. "Don't," she whispered, because that was what she had left. Blaine leaned closer until the bridge of his nose nearly touched hers. "You don't tell me what to do in my truck." He had made one mistake already without recognizing it. He called it his truck, while 2 private guards stood inside and recorded from different angles for a private channel his friends paid to access. A cruel little audience built on humiliation clips and power displays. One guard wore tactical gloves that had never seen real field work. The other wore a ball cap with a sheriff's charity logo and grinned like this was Friday entertainment. Lena's boots scraped again. No leverage, no oxygen. Her pulse hammered against Blaine's palm. The trailer rocked as it idled, and metal hooks along the wall chimed with each vibration like cheap wind bells in a bad dream. Outside, beyond 3 layers of insulated steel and 1 camera feed, Checkpoint 5 ran under the old military quarantine hangar, where fluorescent lights hummed and turned every face pale. 17 personnel watched the live truck camera on a mounted monitor. 17 saw Blaine's grip close and stay closed. 17 heard Lena's breath break into that rough, choking percussion medics recognized immediately. Nobody moved. A county sergeant with silver at his temples stood closest to the screen. He stirred powdered creamer into his coffee, slow circles, eyes fixed on the cup while Lena's knees buckled on video. The spoon clicked ceramic. Click, click, click. He did not look up until the creamer dissolved. At the back wall, a deputy pretended to check radio batteries one by one, peeling labels and restacking them in a neat row. A civilian logistics clerk pulled up a spreadsheet and enlarged a column that did not need enlarging. A National Guard liaison crossed his arms and watched the floor drain as if there were something urgent about rust. 2 private security contractors by the door leaned in for a better viewing angle and whispered about whether Blaine would make her pass out this time or stop short like last week. 17 adults in uniform and credentials and access badges. Not one hand reached for the override key hanging on the red hook beside the monitor. Inside the trailer, Lena's vision tunneled in and out. She knew this pattern. She had seen hypoxic confusion in patients at 3 a.m, had coached strangers through panic and mask intolerance and the terror of not getting enough air. The body got loud first, then distant. Her ears rang, her fingertips tingled. Her throat burned where his fingers dug deeper, and the cartilage at the front of her neck felt tender in a way that promised bruises by sunrise if there was a sunrise she got to see. She tried to speak Mateo's name, and only managed a thin hiss. Blaine heard it anyway. "The kid?" he said, smiling without warmth. "You should have thought about him before you started acting curious." One of the guards laughed harder at that and panned down to capture her boots skidding. The camera light blinked red. Recording. Lena bucked upward with everything she had left, driving her knee toward Blaine's thigh. She connected. He swore under his breath, released pressure for half a second, then struck her across the face with the back of his free hand. The sound hit first, a hard, flat crack that bounced off the metal walls. Her head snapped sideways. More blood. The crate label blurred and doubled in her vision. Pediatric respiratory aid kits, outbound charitable transfer. She knew there were no such transfers tonight. She knew because she had checked the internal schedule before clocking out, and this route did not exist on any authorized dispatch. She knew because the driver avoided the lit route and took perimeter roads between checkpoints where cameras were older and bored men got paid to stay bored. She also knew exactly how long people could lose oxygen before decisions made themselves permanent. Outside, the monitor feed jittered as the truck suspension shifted. Someone in the checkpoint room turned the volume down by 2 notches. "Don't make this messy," Blaine said. "You sign the paperwork. You keep your mouth shut. You get home." He loosened his grip just enough for her to drag in half a breath, then tightened again to punish her for taking it. Lena's right heel began tapping against the steel floor without her choosing it at first. Tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 a rhythm from old medic drills done on field cots under dim red lights, a distress pattern for sedation scenarios when your voice was gone and your hands were pinned. She hadn't used it in years. Muscle memory found it before thought did. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. The guard with the sheriff's logo noticed the sound and kicked at her boot, trying to stop it. He missed the first time, then caught the sole on the second and shoved her foot sideways. The impact thudded up her leg. She bit back a cry because crying used air she didn't have. In the checkpoint room, the youngest person there, a 19-year-old gate tech on her 3rd overnight shift, stared at the monitor and swallowed hard. Her hand hovered near the intercom switch. She looked to the sergeant. He kept stirring coffee long after the cup needed stirring. She looked to the deputy by the batteries. He never looked up. She looked to the red hook with the override key. Nobody gave permission, and she had already been warned once that people who touched equipment outside chain of command did not keep jobs. She lowered her hand. Nobody helped. In the trailer, Blaine leaned in again, his breath clean mint over chemical cold. "My father owns this hospital," he said. "He owns this county. He owns the cops in it. You think one night nurse can change that?" He held her there for the answer he wanted, the answer that proved she understood the hierarchy. Her body trembled against his grip. Her face darkened. Her eyes watered from pressure and fury. One of the guards zoomed in until the frame held only her throat and Blaine's hand. At checkpoint 5, 17 personnel watched that close-up. A paramedic contractor in county blues rubbed both palms over his face and said nothing. A transportation supervisor checked his watch twice in 10 seconds. The sergeant finally lifted his eyes to the screen, saw Lena's head loll, and looked away again to the pale swirl in his coffee as if the cup might absolve him. The truck engine idled rougher. Wind rattled the hangar skin outside. In the lane beyond the monitor room, a handler in NWU Type 3 camouflage stopped mid-stride because the German shepherd at his side had gone rigid, ears pinned forward, a low thunder rolling in his chest that did not belong to contraband detection. Then Diesel moved. Diesel hit the end of the leash with a force that snapped Mitchell Morrison half a step forward, claws scraping concrete, shoulders squared toward Bay 5 like he was bracing against incoming fire. Mitchell's hand closed higher on the lead out of reflex, not panic, and that alone made 3 people in the corridor turn. Diesel did not pull like this for narcotics, and he did not break posture once he had been given a working command. His ears pinned forward, his body locked. A growl rolled up from deep in his chest, low and sustained, the sound of thunder before it found ground. Mitchell felt the vibration travel through nylon and into his own scarred palm. The fluorescent lights above them buzzed. Cold air from the hangar's ancient vents dragged across his face, carrying coffee, wet canvas, and the metallic chill of the refrigerated lanes. "Diesel, sit," Mitchell said. Diesel did not sit. That was the first thing the 19-year-old gate tech noticed, and she stared at the dog instead of the live monitor for the first time in 15 minutes. Mitchell saw her name tape when she shifted near the console. P. Rios. Her throat moved when she swallowed. Beside her, the county sergeant set his cup down with careful fingers, as if managing his own expression by controlling porcelain. The spoon still trembled against the inside rim. In the truck feet on the wall, Lena Ortiz's head sagged to one side, under Blaine Prescott's grip, then jerked when she tried for air. The audio was turned low, but even low did not hide the wet rattle in her chest. Mitchell did not ask what he was looking at. He already knew. Diesel drove forward again, this time angling not toward the monitor room door, but toward the red-painted override cabinet, mounted between lanes, the one with the steel key tag that should have been in a supervisor's hand the moment the feed showed a chokehold. He planted his paws, eyes fixed on the cabinet, then snapped his gaze back to the screen and gave one sharp bark that cracked through the corridor like a warning shot. The deputy at the battery table flinched. The logistics clerk minimized his spreadsheet in one guilty motion. Nobody reached for the key. "Control that dog," the sergeant said too quickly. Mitchell kept his eyes on the screen. "Open the trailer." "Not your lane," the sergeant said. "Prescott transfer. You don't have that clearance." Mitchell finally looked at him. The sergeant was older, heavier in the shoulders, the kind of man who once might have run toward trouble and had spent too many years learning the payroll logic of this county. His badge reflected monitor light in a hard white streak. He held himself like a gate that expected to stay closed. Behind him, Diesel's growl dropped lower. Inside the trailer, Lena's boot struck steel in a broken rhythm that bled through the truck mic between compressor pulses. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Blaine shifted his grip, said something Mitchell could not catch through distortion, then laughed when she failed to answer. One of the private guards moved in for a tighter shot, and the camera framed only a hand at a throat and blood at a lip. The frame jittered when the truck suspension rocked. Mitchell's heartbeat stayed even, but his hearing narrowed to that pattern on the floor. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Cole Danner had taught that code in a plywood medbay outside Aden 6 years earlier, drilling it into medics, breachers, and handlers between mortar warnings. If your mouth was blocked, if your arms were restrained, if sedation hit wrong, heel signal. Keep it simple. Keep it repeatable. Don't wait for permission. Mitchell remembered Cole tapping it against a cot rail while joking about how none of them ever retired clean. He remembered hearing that same rhythm through broken comms during the Yemen breach when the channel was full of static and screaming and he could not get to Cole before the roofline folded. He heard it now in a refrigerated trailer under county lights. "Rios," Mitchell said without taking his eyes off the feed. "Give me override." The gate tech's hand twitched toward the cabinet, then stopped when the sergeant turned his head. "Stand down," he told her. "That's an order." Rios froze. In the trailer, Lena's tapping stuttered when Blaine kicked at her ankle. She managed one more sequence anyway, weaker but intact. Mitchell watched the cadence, watched the guard's camera tilt, watched Blaine's mouth move in that bored way men moved when they believed consequence belonged to other people. Diesel pulled so hard the lead sang against the clip. He was 90 pounds of tan and black loyalty, coat dark as iron in the corridor shadow, and every line of him pointed to one fact no one in uniform wanted to acknowledge. This was not cargo control. This was a rescue. A private contractor by the door gave a dry laugh and muttered, "Dog's bugging on vibration." Mitchell turned his head just enough to include the man. "No." The word landed flat. No volume. No argument. The contractor looked away first. The sergeant lifted his radio and did not key it. "Morrison, I'm telling you one time, this is a county-cleared medical transfer. You interfere, and you'll be removed from this site." Mitchell stepped closer to the override cabinet. Not rushed, not theatrical. Diesel matched him instantly, shoulder-brushing Mitchell's leg before he squared to the lane again. The old scar along Mitchell's jaw pulled white under the fluorescent glare, and for a second the room seemed to remember what NWU Type 3 looked like when worn by someone who still believed rules meant protection, not cover. The deputy stopped pretending to organize batteries. The logistics clerk let his mouse go still. Even the security contractors at the door shifted their weight away from the threshold, as if giving distance to weather. "Removed by who?" Mitchell asked. The sergeant's jaw tightened. "Sheriff's office." From inside the trailer, Blaine's voice broke through cleaner for a moment as the guard camera adjusted gain. "My father owns this hospital. You hear me? This whole county runs on Prescott money." He had said it to Lena, but the mic carried it into the checkpoint room like testimony. Mitchell glanced at the monitor speaker, then at the red hook. "That statement's on record now," he said. No one answered him. Diesel's ears rotated, then pinned hard again. He shifted from growl to a short, urgent whine, and struck the concrete once with his paw, then twice, mirroring the distress rhythm from the trailer, as if he were trying to drag the signal into human language. Mitchell felt the old split between memory and present thin to paper. Yemen heat. Cedar Falls cold. Cole's laugh. Lena's heel. Different year. Same helpless audience. Same pause where institutions waited to see which way power leaned before acting. He was done waiting. Mitchell reached for the override cabinet. The sergeant stepped in and caught his forearm. Diesel exploded forward a half-foot, not biting, just showing teeth and depth and intent, and the sergeant yanked his hand back like he had touched an energized rail. "Call your supervisor," the sergeant snapped to no one in particular. Rio spoke before she could reconsider. "Sir, Federal MWD protocol says imminent threat to life supersedes lane authority if an active handler identifies distress." The room turned toward her. She went pale, but did not look down. "Who trained you to quote policy at me?" the sergeant said. "My mother did," she said, voice shaking once then steady. "She died waiting on a transfer Prescott delayed." Silence hit the room so hard even the monitor compressor seemed loud. The sergeant stared at her, searching for a way to put that sentence back in her mouth. He found none. Mitchell used the space, opened the cabinet, pulled the key, and moved for Bay 5. Diesel was already in motion, gate clipped and focused, claws striking concrete in precise bursts. Two contractors at the lane gate saw them coming and stepped aside without being told. Nobody blocked them now. By the time Mitchell reached the trailer latch, the tap code inside had gone faint enough that he had to lean toward the steel to catch it through the refrigeration unit. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. The pattern was fraying. He put his hand on the locking wheel and felt Diesel press close at his left knee, body rigid, breath fast but controlled. The steel was so cold it burned his skin through the glove seam. Through the door he heard Blaine say, "You pass out when I say," and a guard laugh on the inhale. Mitchell tightened his grip on the wheel. "Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. Because this story traveled farther than the people in that room ever expected. Subscribe if you believe veterans and women like Lena Ortiz deserve better than purchased silence and polished badges. Stay with this to the very end, because what happened in that corridor before dawn stripped a family name off a hospital wall by sunset. Then the story went backward, all the way to a kitchen that smelled like maple syrup and disinfectant wipes, where Lena Ortiz stood barefoot at 6:12 every morning after a 12-hour respiratory shift and pressed dinosaur batter into a chipped plastic mold Mateo refused to throw away. She was 28, 5'4", and built like someone who never confused soft with weak. The old MMA scars along her left forearm looked pale against her skin, thin half-moons from Army medic cross-training she took when convoys started getting hit, and triage sometimes had to happen before security caught up. She kept her dark hair braided tight for work, slept in fragments, and carried a laminated card in her wallet with 3 names: Mateo's school office, Mateo's pediatric clinic, and Mrs. Cardenas next door, who could pick him up if Lena got held over. Lena's sister, Marisol, had died of sepsis 2 winters earlier after a delayed diagnosis at an out-of-network urgent care 40 miles away. That was the sentence the town used. It sounded clean. It hid the uglier truth. She had sat in a plastic chair for 9 hours because she could not pay up front. And by the time she reached an ICU bed, numbers had already turned against her. Marisol left behind a 6-year-old boy with a gap-toothed smile, a backpack full of plastic fossils, and a habit of asking if adults were coming back soon whenever someone stepped outside to take a phone call. Lena never lied to him. She also never let him see her cry. By the second week of October, she had stopped setting an alarm on her days off because her body woke at 4:30 anyway, the hour when ventilator alarms usually began their long chain reaction across Prescott Memorial's night floor. She knew oxygen flow rates by sound. She could hear whether a high-flow nasal cannula was seated right from the hallway. She could tell, just from the cadence of a cough through a curtain, when panic was making a patient worse than pathology. On paper, she was respiratory support technician, overnight. In practice, she was the person nurses called when someone's breathing turned into fear. Her locker held 2 things nobody touched. One was a folded Army photo of her at 21, slimmer, sunburned, smiling beside a Humvee in Kandahar with her medic patch taped over because regulations shifted every week. The other was a small lunchbox sticker Mateo had drawn in green marker. TIA Lena Fixes Air. He had spelled half of it wrong. She kept it anyway. Money was always 5 steps behind her. Rent, insulin for her own nighttime lows, Mateo's after-school fee, Marisol's old legal debt she had inherited by default because nobody else stepped forward. She counted in 20s and nickels in overtime hours. She sold her motorcycle first, then her jewelry, then the spare TV. She still had a yellow legal pad on the fridge listing bills in 3 columns: now, late, and pray. On a Thursday, near the end of the month, just after 7:40 p.m., her charge nurse slid a clipboard onto the counter with a voice that did not meet her eyes. "Extra transport shift," the nurse said. "Outbound respiratory inventory, county cleared, 1 hour premium and mileage. They requested someone who can verify airway kits." Lena scanned the form. Prescott Memorial logo. Logistics subcontract line. Signature block pre-filled with her name, even though she had not agreed yet. Route listed as Auxiliary Medical Transfer Corridor. No unit number, no pharmacist sign-off or sedatives listed in the manifest. The paper looked official in the same way counterfeit bills looked official when you were too tired to hold them up to light. "Who requested me?" Lena asked. The nurse lifted one shoulder. "Administration." That meant Prescott. That always meant Prescott. Lena checked her phone. One message from Mateo's school app about Spirit Week. One from Mrs. Cardenas. "He ate 2 quesadillas. Fell asleep on the couch waiting for you." She looked at the legal pad photo she kept as her lock screen and did the math she hated. The premium would cover the electric bill and half the pediatric dental payment. She was already 2 weeks late on. She signed. At 8:16 p.m., she stepped out the employee entrance with a backpack, a thermos, and a knot between her shoulder blades she could not stretch out. The loading bay lights blew everything flat and colorless. A white refrigerated truck waited by Dock C with magnetic Prescott Memorial placards on both doors, edges lifting slightly like they had been applied in a hurry. 2 private guards stood near the rear in tactical vests that still had fold creases from packaging. One smoked clove cigarettes. The other scrolled his phone and laughed at something, with the thin, bored laugh of a man who had never had to account for his own worst moment. "Ortiz?" the taller guard asked. She nodded once. He held the clipboard for her initials again, this time on a digital pad with the timestamp disabled. She noticed that detail, too. Inside the trailer, cold air bit her sinuses. The crates were stacked in 2 neat columns, strapped by someone who understood transport physics but not hospital habit. Real hospital staff labeled for handoff priority. These were labeled for distance. She ran her glove over one stencil and felt raised paint where ink should have been. She bent toward another label and saw the serial sequence skip by 6 digits, then repeat with a different expiration date. The lie sat right there in black lettering, assuming nobody in the truck could read inventory code the way respiratory techs read weather. "Where's the pharmacist's seal?" she asked without turning. "County cleared," the smoking guard said. "You just verify count. That's not what the form said." "Then don't read forms," he said. She straightened slowly. Her pulse had already started climbing, not from fear yet, from recognition. Systems failed in patterns. So did men who profited from those failures. Blaine Prescott had been walking those halls since he was 15, always loud, always untouched. Son of Grant Prescott, hospital board chair, foundation donor, photo op patron saint of every children's fundraiser in Cedar Falls. Blaine treated restricted corridors like private lounges and staff like rental property. He had dragged a nurse into a supply alcove the year before and called it a misunderstanding after security footage vanished between upload and review. He had shoved a phlebotomist against a wall over a billing delay and sent flowers the next day with his family crest stamped on the card, as if apology were a branding exercise. Human Resources logged complaints and buried them under procedural language until complainants transferred or quit. Everyone knew. Nobody said his name above a careful volume. Cedar Falls wore Prescott ownership in concrete. Prescott Memorial Hospital, Prescott Children's Pavilion, bright murals and donor plaques where cameras panned during holiday telethons. Prescott Center for Civic Leadership at the community college, a glass box where elected officials shook hands and promised reform under his family name in brushed steel letters. 3 buildings, 1 surname, 1 message. Blaine used a single sentence the way other men used fists. My father owns this hospital, this county, these cops. He said it to bartenders, nurses, deputies, women in elevator corners, contractors who asked for the payment terms, and once to an EMT who objected when he blocked an ambulance bay with his Porsche SUV. The EMT got suspended for conduct unbecoming. Blaine posted photos from a ski weekend while the review was pending. Lena had filed 1 complaint herself 8 months earlier after Blaine cornered her in a stairwell and put his hand on her throat, just long enough to make his point, smiling like it was a joke only he understood. She documented bruising. She attached shift camera times. Intake stamped it received at 9:14. At 11:02, she got an email saying there was insufficient corroboration and reminding her that false allegations could expose employees to disciplinary action. She printed that email and taped it inside her pantry door so she would remember exactly what protection looked like in Cedar Falls. At 8:31 p.m., while she stood among fake inventory crates and 2 men with dead eyes, she saw a black leather jacket swing into view at the trailer entrance and felt certainty settle like lead. Blaine stepped in with clean white designer sneakers and those absurd $420 sunglasses hooked at his collar, though night had already erased the sun. He smelled like mint and expensive detergent. His smile was easy, rehearsed, unhurried. Ortiz? He said, glancing at her badge, then at the crates. Good. You're detail-oriented. She kept her hands visible, and her weight centered, old training waking in joints she had not trusted in years. This manifest is wrong. He looked pleased, as if she had delivered a line on cue. No, he said. It's flexible. Open the rear and I walk. He gave a small laugh and leaned against the doorframe. You're not in a position to negotiate. Outside, one of the guards slammed the latch bar. Steel rang. Then came the second sound, a lock engaging from the outside. Lena's eyes flicked to the seam, then back to Blaine. You just made this kidnapping. He tilted his head. You people always choose dramatic words. You people. He spread his hands like a host welcoming guests. Shift workers, union talkers, women who think policy is a shield. You clock in, clock out, and forget whose name signs the checks. Lena watched his pupils instead of his smile. Narcissists telegraphed through their eyes when the room stopped feeding them. My check has your father's logo, she said, not his immunity. For 1 second, something sharp crossed his face. Then it vanished. My father owns this hospital, he said, almost bored now. He owns this county. He owns the sheriff's office that clears these routes. 4 checkpoints tonight. 4 green lights. You think they didn't know whose truck this was? He stepped closer until only a crate edge separated them. I need one thing from you. You sign revised transfer documents. You validate inventory movement if anyone asks. You stop looking at codes like they mean anything. Do that and you go home in one piece. Her throat tightened. Not from his hand yet, from the casual way he said one piece like product condition. What's in the crates? She asked. His smile came back, thinner. Not your concern. She heard movement outside, boots, muffled laughter, a phone camera test tone. She smelled bleach, Freon, and clove smoke leaking under the door seam. In her mind, she saw Mateo's plastic dinosaur mold drying on the rack beside the sink. Green marker smile still on the lunchbox sticker. Tiny fingers counting blueberries while he waited for her to flip pancakes after dawn. Lena met Blaine's gaze and understood the architecture all at once. The forms, the fake codes, the county-cleared lane, the men who did not ask questions, the checkpoints that saluted donor money, the hospital logo used as camouflage. This was not one violent son improvising cruelty. This was a system with invoices. She set her jaw and said the worst possible word to a man like him. No. The word hung between them like steel wire, thin and sharp, and Blaine's smile flattened as if someone had erased it with a thumb. He did not strike her right away. He studied her first, head tilted, the way men like him always did when they met. Resistance, they had been told, did not exist in their world. Outside the locked trailer, one guard laughed softly into his phone camera, waiting for the next part. The refrigeration unit throbbed through the floor. Lena kept her feet planted and her breathing measured, counting heartbeats, watching Blaine's shoulders instead of his hands. Somewhere beyond Dock C and the loading lights and the Prescott logos, bolted to every visible surface, another man in the same county was standing under different fluorescent lights, and sleep had not touched him in years. Mitchell Morrison signed the 2035 kennel transfer log at Fort Saylor Disposition Center with a hand that looked steady until someone noticed the white scars crossing the knuckles. NWU Type 3 camouflage sat on him like armor he had forgotten how to remove. At 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, he took up corridor space without trying. Dark brown hair cut close, early gray at the temples, old scar across his jaw from a Fallujah stairwell where plaster and metal came down together and changed his face by half an inch. Men who did not know him read him as calm. Men who had served with him knew calm was the mask over impact. He had not slept more than 2 consecutive hours since Yemen. The memory came without warning and without sequence, the way trauma always ignored chronology. 1 second, he was in a cinder block office smelling of toner and bleach, pen moving over routine signatures. The next second, he was back on broken comms outside Aden, helmet pressed to concrete dust, listening to Cole Danner's breath turn jagged over a channel full of static and overlapping call signs. Compound breach gone wrong, rooftop collapse, medevac delayed by weather and bad coordinates. Mitchell had shouted Cole's name until his throat tore and heard only fragments in return. One broken laugh, one garbled order, then silence that lasted the rest of his life. He still woke to that silence. By the first week of September, his neighbors in base housing had learned that the footsteps in the hallway at 210 and 347 and 431 were always Mitchell pacing laps, counting tile seams like prayer beads while the television ran low volume to keep the rooms from going quiet. Quiet was what did it. Quiet let Yemen in. He kept a bottle of whiskey on the top shelf and told himself it was for guests. There were no guests. Most nights he poured one finger anyway and left it sweating amber on the table until dawn. At 2041, Chief Warrant Officer Ames looked up from a stack of disposition files and watched Mitchell pause at the kennel wing door as if he were listening to something no one else heard. "You good?" Ames asked. Mitchell blinked once, returning to the room. "Yeah." "You lying?" Mitchell set the pen down. "Also, yeah." Ames gave a short nod, no pity in it. He had gray in his beard and old blast damage in one ear. "You're on screening rotation, not hero rotation. If this county circus spills over, You call command and stay in lane." Mitchell's mouth moved in something close to a smile. "Has staying in lane worked for this county so far?" Ames slid a folder across the desk without answering. "You're not wrong. You're still on paper. Paper. Forms, clearances. Liability language thick enough to smother common sense." Mitchell had spent 11 months inside that maze to keep one retired MWD from being pushed into disposal because no department wanted to carry the cost of a damaged hip and age-related anxiety in a budget quarter where optics mattered more than loyalty. He knew every signature block by memory. He knew which offices ignored requests until you attached a legal citation in the subject line. He knew who returned calls only after a congressional liaison copied the thread. He had learned bureaucracy as combat. The adoption file had started as a thin packet with 6 pages and one brutal phrase in the margin. Non-deployable. Recommend euthanasia consideration. Mitchell had read it twice, then walked straight to legal, then to medical, then to command, then back to legal with a binder he built himself. Service citations, behavioral evaluations, veterinary projections, handler testimony, budget offsets. Every page an argument that a dog who had saved American lives was not disposable inventory. "Request denied," the first email said. He appealed. "Insufficient kennel capacity for long-term rehabilitation placement." He appealed again. "Handler separation period exceeded." He printed that one and carried it in his cargo pocket for 2 weeks until the edges softened with sweat. Exceeded. As if time erased bond. As if distance canceled duty. It was Ames, finally, who found him at 120 outside the legal office with red-rimmed eyes and said, "You want him? Stop asking like they're doing you a favor. Start writing like you're reminding them what honor costs." Mitchell rewrote every line. By late October, the file had grown to 213 pages, including sworn statements from 2 former team medics and one JTAC who wrote in block capitals that Diesel had alerted on a pressure plate IED outside Sangin 12 seconds before detonation, and those 12 seconds had put 23 Americans behind cover. There was a veterinary affidavit about the Kandahar shrapnel wound. Left hip penetration with residual neuropathic pain. There was an operations summary naming 7 deployments and listing mission numbers, blacked out in thick bars, only outcomes left visible. Element extracted, civilians cleared, casualties reduced. There was also one paragraph Mitchell did not expect command to approve. He wrote it anyway. He wrote that when Cole Danner died in Yemen, Diesel had refused food for 36 hours and lay against Mitchell's boots outside the aid station until someone ordered both of them to move. He wrote that trauma did not belong only to men. He wrote that if service meant anything, then retirement could not mean abandonment. 3 days later, legal called. The captain on the line sounded bored in the way bureaucrats sounded when delivering life-altering decisions. Conditional approval, pending medical waiver and civilian housing inspection. 90-day reevaluation. Mitchell closed his eyes and sat down on the curb outside admin because his knees stopped cooperating without notice. "Say that again." "Conditional approval," she repeated. "Don't make me say it a third time, petty officer." He laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, then covered his face with both hands in the parking lot while supply trucks rolled past, and nobody looked twice at a grown man in uniform shaking like he had just come in from cold water. He drove straight to the kennel wing, signed 3 more forms, waded through one final argument with a contracting officer about liability language, and stood still when they opened the run gate. Diesel walked out slow at first, left hip stiff, tan and black saddleback coat dulled by fluorescent light. Then he saw Mitchell and changed speed without warning, shoulder driving into Mitchell's thighs hard enough to stagger him. Mitchell dropped to one knee on concrete and grabbed a double handful of fur and felt the dog's chest heaving against his own. Diesel made a sound low in his throat. Not a bark, not a whine, something older and rawer like recognition after exile. "You took your time," Ames said from the doorway. Mitchell pressed his forehead to Diesel's head. "Paperwork. Worst enemy you ever fought?" Mitchell looked up, hand still on the dog's neck. Not even close. The sleep did not come back after the adoption. It changed shape. With Diesel in the apartment, Mitchell stopped pacing every hallway lap. But he still woke at 2 a.m. to phantom radio static and sat on the edge of the bed while Diesel lifted his head from the mat and watched him without judgment. On bad nights, Mitchell read old after-action notes until sunrise. On worse nights, he cleaned already clean gear and checked door locks 3 times in 1 hour. Diesel learned the pattern and interrupted it when he could, pressing his head against Mitchell's sternum until breathing slowed, then staying there with the stubborn patience of something that had survived gunfire and bureaucracy and still chose trust. He was not a cure. He was an anchor. At 2048, Mitchell pushed through the kennel wing doors at Fort Sailor and found Diesel already awake, already standing, ears tracking the corridor before any audible cue reached human range. 90 pounds, German shepherd, coat that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow. Left hip scar hidden under fur, but never fully forgotten in cold weather. Service tattoo faded under the inside thigh. Eyes fixed and bright, reading the world in frequencies most men ignored. "Easy," Mitchell said softly. Diesel came forward, halted 1 foot short, then sat on command with textbook precision that made new handlers underestimate him and old handlers respect him more. Mitchell clipped the lead and did a standard gait check, palms skimming along the spine, then the flank, then resting gently near the left hip. Diesel shifted once, mild protective tension. Pain present, manageable. Mitchell logged it in the pad clipped to the run door because details mattered, and neglected details became disasters. A civilian vet tech in Navy scrubs approached with a tablet. "He's due for imaging next week. You still want sedation protocol B?" "Protocol A," Mitchell said. "He comes up cleaner." "Protocol A takes longer. He panics less." She glanced at Diesel, then back at Mitchell. "You know him better than the chart." "The chart has never heard him wake up." She nodded and entered the change. By the second week of November, Fort Sailor had rotated in a new contracting supervisor who treated retired MWDs like line items and kept asking why Mitchell spent extra unpaid hours on one dog's retraining maintenance when the animal was already placed. Mitchell answered once quietly that readiness was not the only metric that mattered. The supervisor smirked and asked if sentiment was now a budget category. Diesel, across the room, lifted his head and stared at the man until he lost his sentence halfway through. Some power dynamics shifted without a word. Service record did not feel abstract when you watched Diesel work. In open field scent drills, he ignored decoys and locked on trace compounds with machine-like confidence, then broke pattern only when a hidden human subject's pulse rose into panic range, at which point he shifted alerts from object to person. In vehicle sweeps, he moved panel seams with surgical efficiency, tail still, breathing controlled, never performing for praise, only confirming what his nose already knew. Twice that fall, he alerted on concealed nitrates in training vehicles before instrumentation caught them, and every handler on lane detail adjusted procedures because old dogs still taught hard lessons. Mitchell kept a copy of Diesel's citation summary, folded in his pocket behind his ID-7 deployments. 23 lives credited in writing, more likely uncounted. Kandahar breech injury, shrapnel through left hip during extraction under small arms fire. Returned to duty after rehabilitation. Retired without ceremony when budgets tightened and younger dogs filled slots. He read those lines on nights when the county felt rotten enough to make him doubt institutions entirely. The lines reminded him that institutions failed, people failed, but duty could still be specific, still measurable, still real. At 2056, Diesel paused at the end of Bay Corridor and lifted his nose into the airflow coming from the checkpoint lanes. Not contraband focus, not routine curiosity. His ears rotated forward, then pinned, body rigid, low thunder in the chest. Mitchell felt the lead tighten. He looked toward Bay 5, where refrigerated engines idled behind steel doors, and every old lesson snapped into alignment at once. Cole's tap code, sleepless years, paperwork battles, a dog who had earned the right to be trusted more than any man in a polished office. Mitchell put his hand on Diesel's neck and felt the vibration of the growl deepen, as if the floor itself were sending a warning upward. "Show me," he said. Diesel moved. The locking wheel fought him for half a turn, frozen by cold and neglect, while inside the trailer, Blaine's hand stayed clamped on Lena's throat, and her heel tapped one last weak pattern against steel before it slipped sideways. Mitchell set his weight, drove the wheel down, and heard the seal crack with a long rubber tear that sounded like fabric ripping in a quiet church. Diesel pressed tight to his leg, shoulders hard as carved wood, breath pushing in measured bursts through his nose. The refrigeration unit roared on the other side of the door. Someone inside laughed, short and mean, and the laugh cut off when the latch bar dropped. In the monitor room behind them, 17 people watched the feed and then watched the real door in Bay 5, and nobody pretended to check batteries now. The county sergeant took one step forward, then stopped when Rios keyed her headset and said, voice flat with fear, "Lane 5 override executed under imminent life protocol. Recording retained." The sentence put a timestamp on every face in that room. Mitchell pulled the door open. Cold vapor rolled out over his boots and spilled into the lane like ground fog. Bleach hit first, then Freon, then copper from fresh blood. White crates lined both walls, stenciled with fake Prescott Memorial codes. One private guard stood just outside the trailer threshold, with his phone raised, filming in. The second guard stood near the rear partition inside, blinking as the light adjusted. Blaine stood center aisle in a leather jacket and clean designer sneakers. Fingers dug into Lena's neck, holding her just off balance so her heels scraped the ribbed floor each time she tried to plant. Lena's lip was split. Blood tracked down her chin and streaked a crate marked Pediatric Respiratory Aid Kits. Her eyes were wet, furious, unfocused at the edges. She saw camouflage in the doorway, then a German shepherd shape below it, and for a second she thought she was hallucinating from hypoxia. Then she heard the dogs growl and knew she was still in the world. Mitchell stepped in one pace, no rush, no wasted motion, and said, "Let her go." 3 words, no volume, no explanation. Blaine turned his head without releasing pressure. He took in the uniform, the scar along Mitchell's jaw, the dog, the key hanging from Mitchell's fist, and smiled with the old confidence of a man who had never had to revise a plan mid-sentence. "You just broke county chain," Blaine said. "My father owns this hospital. Half the sheriff's office clears these lanes. You're done." Mitchell did not answer him. He watched Lena's airway, the angle of Blaine's wrist, the guard's foot placement, the distance to each phone and crate edge and blind corner. He heard Yemen in the compressor rhythm and forced it back into the box he used for memory under stress. He did not need anger. He needed geometry. Diesel moved one step into the trailer and stopped at Mitchell's knee, his ears pinned forward, his body locked. The growl deepened, a low, continuous warning that sat in the metal walls and made both guards lower their phones by instinct before they realized they had done it. Tan and black saddleback coat, dark as iron in the trailer shadow. Left hip scar hidden under fur, eyes fixed on Blaine's hand. "Call your people," Blaine said, speaking louder now, performing for the men at the door and the camera still running at the threshold. "Call command. Call whoever you think matters. This transfer is legal." The guard inside found his voice. "Sir, he can't enter without—" "Shut up," Blaine snapped, never taking his eyes off Mitchell. "Get this on video." The outside guard raised his phone again, but his hand shook. Lena tried to pull air around Blaine's thumb, and got only a thin wheeze. She shifted, searching for leverage, and her boot struck steel in a broken tap that hit Mitchell like a live wire. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Cole Danner's drill rhythm, frayed but there. Not random panic. Deliberate signal. Conscious mind still fighting. Mitchell's jaw tightened once. "Last warning." Blaine gave a short laugh. "You think you scare me in a costume?" He squeezed Lena harder to prove he could. Her face darkened another shade and her knees buckled. Diesel rose. He came up without barking, front paws lifting just enough to change the line of his shoulders. Teeth visible now, not lunging, not touching, only presenting consequence in the exact language predators understood. 90 pounds of trained control held on a 6-foot lead by a man who was not straining. The guard nearest the crates swore and stumbled backward into a stack, snapping one plastic tie. A crate shifted and banged the wall. Outside in the lane, 2 contractors who had joked 10 minutes earlier about pass-out timing stood rigid in the doorway and did nothing. Inside the checkpoint room, the sergeant grabbed his radio and finally keyed it. "Need supervisor at Bay 5, he said. "Now." He did not say why. The mic still caught his breathing. Rios looked at the live monitor, then at the lane camera, then at the sergeant. "Federal Task Force is already on delayed dial from last week's audit ping," she said, voice small but clear. "If this feed gets scrubbed, server mirror keeps it." He stared at her like she had struck him. Back in the trailer, Blaine heard none of that. He saw only the man in front of him failing to flinch. He shifted tactics, smooth again. "You don't know who you're interfering with," he said. "This is Prescott property. She's an employee refusing directive during controlled transport. That's insubordination, not assault." Lena made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh if oxygen had been available for one. Mitchell took one more step, close enough now to smell mint on Blaine's breath under the bleach. "Hand! Off!" Blaine looked down at Diesel, then back up. "You touch me, and your career ends." Mitchell's expression did not change. "Not my career." The line landed heavier than shouting would have. It told Blaine 2 things at once. This man was not bargaining, and this man had already accepted cost. The guard near the partition tried to slide right, angling for Mitchell's blind side. Diesel's head snapped toward him so fast the leash hardware clicked like a trigger reset. The guard froze with one foot half raised and stayed there. Lena felt pressure ease for a fraction of a second as Blaine's attention split. She sucked in a ragged breath that burned all the way down, coughed, and tasted blood and chemical cold. Her vision widened enough to catch details again. NWU Type 3 pattern on Mitchell's sleeves, the old white scar at his jawline, Diesel's paws planted wide for traction, The fake crate labels with duplicated lot numbers. The tiny red light on a guard's camera still recording. Evidence. Witnesses. Air. Mitchell saw her airway open and adjusted his stance, left shoulder slightly forward to shield her line if Blaine swung. "Step back, Lena," he said, still watching Blaine's hand. She tried. Her legs shook and held. Blaine's smile had gone. In its place sat a tight, unfamiliar focus, the look of someone reading a room for the first time and disliking what he found. He tried one more appeal to hierarchy because hierarchy had always worked. "My father funds this base wing," he said. "You think they keep you here without us?" Mitchell answered with silence. Diesel answered with a growl that rolled up from his chest and vibrated through the trailer floor. Not loud, certain. For the first time that night, Blaine blinked too fast. He looked at the dog again, then back to Mitchell's eyes, and whatever he expected to find, there was missing. No outrage to manipulate, no fear to exploit, no procedural hesitation to hide inside, just professional stillness and a finished decision. He understood then, in one cold turn of his face, that he was no longer performing for an audience he controlled. His grip loosened by a fraction. Mitchell saw it and did not rush. "All the way," he said. Blaine hesitated, pride warring with calculation. Behind him, one guard whispered, "Blaine," and got no answer. Outside, boots pounded in the lane as additional personnel arrived, then slowed at the doorway when they saw Diesel upright and Mitchell centered in the aisle like a wall. The threshold guard edged in half a step without lowering his phone. Lena staggered as Blaine's fingers finally came off her throat. She caught herself on a crate corner, coughed hard, and dragged in air that sounded like torn paper but kept coming. Purple marks were already rising along her neck. She pressed one hand there, winced, and pointed with the other at the nearest label. "Wrong font," she rasped. "Lot numbers duplicated." Mitchell gave the smallest nod. "I saw." Blaine took a step back and lifted both hands, chest high. Not surrender, not yet. More like a man attempting to rewrite the scene in real time. "Nobody touched her," he said quickly, gesturing toward the guards. "She slipped in transit. This is being twisted." The guard with the sheriff logo cap lowered his phone too slowly. The red record light stayed on. Rios appeared at the trailer door with a tablet, clutched to her vest, and two trembling breaths she never hid. "Bay 5 live feed. Mirrored to federal server," she said to Mitchell, then louder so everyone heard. "And chain of custody. Initiated on all recordings." The sentence changed the temperature in the trailer faster than the refrigeration unit ever could. Blaine turned toward her, mouth opening for the old threat, and closed it when Diesel shifted his weight and rose that extra inch again, silent, eyes bright, waiting. Blaine looked back at Mitchell one more time and finally saw the shape of his mistake. He had hurt someone in front of a man who did not confuse power with permission, and in front of a dog that would not sit down for a lie. The first sound after that realization was not Blaine's voice. It was the click of safeties and the hard cadence of boots as base security and federal task force agents reached the trailer door together, shoulder patches crowding the threshold where nobody had stood 10 minutes earlier. "Hands visible," an agent said. Blaine lifted his chin, found a camera, and tried to recover his script. "Call my father. Right now. This is Prescott medical property." A woman in a dark windbreaker stepped into the aisle, badge already in her hand. "Special Agent Naomi Velez, Human Trafficking Task Group. We already called him." She nodded once to Lena, then to Mitchell. "He's on his way to the command office to explain 4 checkpoint clearances tied to shell charities." That took a piece out of Blaine's posture. Not enough, but visible. Diesel stayed upright until Mitchell touched 2 fingers to his collar and gave the quiet release command. The dog dropped to all fours, still rigid, still tracking Blaine's hands. Lena kept one palm on her bruised throat and another on the crate with the wrong stencil. Her breathing rasped but held steady now. "Photograph this label first," she whispered to Agent Velez. "Font mismatch. Lot sequence duplicates. Seal retaped crooked." Velez didn't hesitate. "Tech team, priority markers, full crate capture, before movement." The trailer became procedure in under 30 seconds. Phones from both private guards were taken, powered down, and bagged with chain of custody tags. The guard in the sheriff charity cap tried to slide his device behind a crate. Diesel's growl rolled once, and the man froze long enough for an evidence tech to take it from his hand. The disabled time-stamped tablet from Doc C went into a separate Faraday pouch. The magnetic Prescott placards were peeled from the truck doors, photographed while still curled at the edges, then sealed in labeled sleeves. Refrigerated manifest printouts, including the pre-filled signature blocks, were logged and cross-matched against the hospital dispatch records in real time. Nothing vanished this time. In the monitor room, the 17 witnesses stood in a line that looked less like authority and more like attendance at a reckoning. Rio sat at the console with shaking hands and did not stop typing. She exported the mirrored live feed, the lane camera angle, and the audio channel that caught Blaine saying his father owned the hospital, the county, and the cops. She printed hash verification sheets and slid them across to federal techs before anyone asked. The county sergeant still had powdered creamer on his sleeve. He stared at it as if the stain had appeared by itself. Agent Velez entered with 2 MPs and stopped in front of him. "You received active violence video and delayed intervention." The sergeant swallowed. "I followed chain. You followed pressure," she said. "Your radio call is on record. Your inaction is documented in the log. Your room audio is captured in the feed." He looked at the deputy who had organized batteries to avoid the screen. The deputy looked at the floor drain and said nothing. The logistics clerk, who had enlarged a pointless spreadsheet, finally spoke, voice thin. "Route edits came from sheriff liaison email. Subject line said, 'Donor-sensitive transport.' I flagged it. My supervisor told me not to put comments in system." "Name," Velez said. He gave it. The loaded silence he had carried all night broke and stayed broken. By 4:07 a.m., Grant Prescott arrived at the command office in a cashmere coat over gym clothes, flanked by 2 attorneys and a hospital compliance director, who looked ill before she sat down. He started with volume. "My son was assaulted by an armed contractor on federal property." Agent Velez turned a monitor toward him and played 67 seconds, Blaine's hand at Lena's throat, Lena's heel tapping distress code, the guards filming, Blaine naming his power. Then she played the lane audio where Grant's own operations manager reached on a recorded callback 20 minutes earlier, confirmed charity transfer exceptions had bypassed normal pharmacy seals for 6 months. Grant stopped talking. The compliance director covered her mouth, then removed her ID badge and placed it on the table without being asked. Subpoenas moved before dawn fully broke. Bank records from Prescott Cares Logistics, Harbor Bridge Medical Outreach, and 2 other nonprofits traced identical directors to 1 law office and 1 Prescott Family Trust. Board minutes from Prescott Memorial showed expedited transfer cooperation, approved under philanthropic immunity language. Intake archives produced 14 prior complaints marked insufficient corroboration, including Lena's stairwell report stamped at 9:14 and closed at 11:02. The closure email warning her about false allegations was entered as retaliatory evidence. At 5:32 a.m., the sheriff arrived, read the federal warrant packet, and tried to narrow scope. County will conduct internal. Velez slid him the cooperation audit already open from last week's ping. County had its chance. He looked toward the sergeant, then toward the deputy, then toward the contractors who had filmed for Blaine's channel. None met his eyes. The hierarchy he counted on collapsed in plain view, layer by layer, because every layer had left fingerprints. By 6:10 a.m., Blaine Prescott was walked through Bay 5 in flex cuffs on trafficking, assault, coercion, falsification of medical manifests, and conspiracy counts. He kept turning his head for cameras that were no longer his. His father was escorted to a separate vehicle under financial crimes detention, pending arraignment. The sheriff's office signed a temporary federal oversight agreement before sunrise. Rios watched from the corridor and did not smile when the sergeant's badge was taken. She only exhaled like someone who had been holding breath for years. At 11:48 a.m., Prescott Memorial's emergency board convened in the pediatric auditorium under the brushed steel donor plaque. Federal marshals stood by both doors. Mitchell sat in the back in NWU Type 3 with Diesel at heel, silent presence reshaping the room before any vote was cast. Lena sat 3 rows ahead with a county victim advocate, ice pack at her throat, voice rough but unwavering as she identified the false crate codes and the transfer form with disabled timestamp. When she finished, the nurse who had slid her the clipboard in triage stepped to the microphone, hands shaking. "I didn't meet her eyes that night," the nurse said. "I knew the root code was wrong. I told myself paperwork made it legal. It didn't." She did not ask forgiveness. She gave the record what she had withheld. The board chair called the motion. Remove the Prescott name from the Children's Pavilion, effective immediately. Freeze all donor branding linked to pending criminal review. Establish a victims' restitution trust, funded by seized Prescott assets and matched by state emergency funds. Refer every sealed complaint tied to Prescott personnel for independent reopening. The vote was unanimous. By sunset, maintenance crews were on ladders outside the hospital facade, unscrewing the Prescott letters one by one, while local cameras rolled from behind barriers. No one in Cedar Falls could say they had not seen it happen. On the courthouse steps, the evening air smelled like wet concrete and exhaust. Lena stood with Mateo tucked against her side, his small hand wrapped around 2 fingers, because he was too old to be carried and too young not to check if she was still there. A family court judge had signed temporary guardianship stabilization that afternoon, along with protected housing placement funded by the new trust. Mrs. Cardenas held the envelope of keys like it might break. Mateo looked up at the German Shepherd first. "Is that Diesel?" Mitchell nodded once. "Yeah." Mateo took a careful step forward and stopped, waiting. Diesel lowered his head, sniffed the boy's sleeve, then leaned his shoulder gently into him. Mateo laughed once, surprised, and buried both hands in tan and black fur. "He's warm," Mateo said. Lena's eyes filled but did not spill. She touched Mitchell's sleeve. "I filed that complaint 8 months ago and thought I was crazy for keeping the email." "You kept evidence," Mitchell said. "That kept you alive." She gave a tired half-smile. "He heard me tapping." Mitchell looked down at Diesel. "He heard a medic distress code. Old one. My teammate Cole drilled it into us in Yemen. Most people forgot it." Lena shook her head slowly. "He didn't." Diesel turned and pressed his head against Mitchell's chest, full weight, the way he did when words ran out. Mitchell's scarred hand settled behind the dog's ears and stayed there. For the first time in years, his shoulders dropped all the way. That night in his apartment, he set the whiskey bottle on the counter, looked at it, and put it back unopened. He checked the door once, not 3 times. Once. Diesel circled his mat, changed his mind, and lay beside Mitchell's bed instead, chin on paws, watching until Mitchell's breathing evened out and held. He slept through until morning. At dawn, Lena stood in a new kitchen with borrowed pans and made dinosaur-shaped pancakes, while Mateo lined blueberries into crooked constellations across the plate. Her throat bruises showed in yellowing shadows, but her voice held steady when she called him to the table. On the counter sat a folder from Victim Services: housing order, trust disbursement schedule, reopened complaint confirmations, and chain of custody receipt numbers for every item from Bay 5, including the phones, tablet, placards, manifests, and crate photographs that had gone to federal evidence storage and analysis. Nothing got lost. Outside, Cedar Falls traffic moved past a hospital wall where fresh bolts marked the empty outline of a name that used to function like a threat. Inside, a boy ate pancakes. A woman breathed without asking permission. A veteran finally slept. And a German shepherd who wouldn't sit for a lie had done exactly what he was trained to do: alert on the truth when everyone else chose silence.